This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everybody. Last Friday, we discussed about the technique of general anesthesia. So these are all the topics of anesthesiology as such. So this will be very important for your PG entrance examination also. As a part of the anesthetic topic, we have anesthesia machine, the techniques of general anesthesia, regional anesthesia, and peripheral nerve blocks, anesthesia drugs, and cardiac arrest, ICU, and all other four important topics. But as far as the main general anesthesia is concerned, anywhere in the world, we already discussed this part. So we have GA being given to all the people who require surgery. So there are handful of surgeries on the lower limbs or in the lower part of the abdomen where regional anesthesia in the form of spinal anesthesia as well as epidural anesthesia holds good. But for all the remaining surgeries on the head and neck, on the chest, cardiac surgeries, and all the surgeries which are going for more than 3 hours, which are requiring blood transfusions in the intraoperative period. So all the different and difficult surgeries, they require general anesthesia as such. In the last class, we talked about the technique of general anesthesia, which includes pre-PAC checkup, induction, intubation, maintenance, emergence, recovery, and all the basic concepts of how we give GA. And in addition to that, today we'll be discussing about the complications. Before going to complications of GA as such, let me take few slides in the front to discuss the basic features of GA and how it is done. So this is like a recap now. So cardinal features of GA are loss of all sensations, sleep, unconsciousness. So providing unconsciousness in the form of sleep, which is recognized at the level of thalamus or the RAS, that is reticular activating system. GA will provide amnesia, which is held by hippocampus. It is causing immobility, where the spinal cord plays a role, and abolition of somatic and autonomic reflexes is very important. So the cardinal features include all the loss of sensations, sleep, amnesia, immobility, and loss of reflexes. So what are the stages of anesthesia? So we can grade it up like stage of analgesia, stage of delirium, stage of surgical anesthesia, and stage of medullary paralysis. So whenever we give general anesthesia, so we start by giving the drugs. These drugs obviously include potent analgesic medications, which will cause decrease in the pain reception. That means the threshold of producing the pain or receiving the pain by the brain is increased. The threshold is increased. So the normal surgical stimulus or like pinching or holding a scalpel on the skin, these type of things will produce pain by stimulating the pain receptors through the peripheral pain receptors like C and A delta fibers, and they go to the dorsal horn nucleus of the spinal cord. They ascend in the anterior and lateral spinal thalamic tracts to the thalamus, and they distribute to the higher centers in the brain, which will perceive this stimulation as pain and generate descending pathways, which will ask the body part to respond in a different fashion. So this is the pain pathway. This pain pathway will be completely submerged in the initial stages of anesthesia, where we give potent analgesic medications. This is the first stage of analgesia. Once the peak plasma concentrations of the anesthetic agents are above a certain threshold, so they cause something called delirium. The person will be in a state of he is called delirious, or he cannot recognize what is happening around him. So he'll be in a confused state, agitated to some extent. And once the concentration of the drugs in the plasma reaching the brain, they increase, that will cause surgical anesthesia, and the body starts not to respond to any stimulus. This is our surgical anesthesia. So if we cross this dose also, and depending on the body weight, if we are providing him with excessive doses of anesthetic agents, then there will be shutting down of the vital centers in the brain, which can cause medullary paralysis, which may not be reversible. So the main idea of giving anesthesia is to keep him calm, keep him in such a way that the patient does not feel any pain. He'll allow the surgery to go on, provide adequate muscle relaxation, and not to go into any irreversible brain damage. That is the thing here. So in the past years, maybe more than 90 years or 100 years, way back from 1846, when it is called Anesthesia Day, World Anesthesia Day, where the ether was really demonstrated in front of the people in Massachusetts General Hospital. So everything was done. So from that time onwards, where the crude ether method was given to provide anesthesia or analgesia to be specific, the person was conscious in that person in that day, and that a dentist was also present there. He provided only analgesia, and it was done. So from that 1846, the process of general anesthesia was purified, refined again, refined, so that potent analgesic medications and potent anesthetic drugs are being given without causing complicated faults on the part of the drugs and pharmacology. Okay, so this is the basic concept of surgical anesthesia. The neurosurgery or cardiac surgery or vascular surgery, the number of surgeries or the complicated surgeries are being done only because the anesthesia part is being maintained properly. So this took, as there is development of procedures and all the technologies in the conduction of general anesthesia is happening, so likewise there is parallel development of all other department. So this is about the stage of general anesthesia and how do we conduct general anesthesia. In the first 5 or 6 slides, let me tell you about the basic plan about how we conduct a GA. So first we ask the patient to be in the PAC room, or we conduct a pre-anesthetic checkup or assessment. It is a medical checkup and laboratory investigations are done by an anesthesia provider before an operation. So what do we want to know from this one? So we want to assess the patient's physical condition and any other medical problems or diseases the patient might be suffering from. So we want to know for which part of his body he came to be operated on, number one, and what part of the body is in compromised state. So if the person has already undergone surgery to his abdomen, we know that it is compromised to some extent. Now he has come for brain surgery. So, or the patient might have undergone craniotomy because of his head injury problem previously, and now he has come for his prostate hypertrophy, where the BPH, where the person is undergoing TURP, transurethral resection of the prostate. So likewise, the person may be having an initial problem for which medical treatment or surgical treatment or any other treatment was done, and now the same person, if he is coming for any other condition for which surgery is indicated, now we have to understand both the physiology and the condition of the organs. So that is what PAC assessment is all about. So we want to know which systems are at fault, we want to know which systems are compromised and what type of medications the person is taking, and now we want to make a best plan how to give and which type of anesthesia has to be given, at what doses the person will tolerate, whether he is okay with the regular doses of the drugs and regular medications, or should we take any particular precautions in managing anesthesia in this person. So this is what we do in PSC clinic. So we want to know the patient's physical condition and know about any comorbid conditions like hypertension, diabetes mellitus, coronary artery disease, any renal problem, any allergic reactions previously, or he is on any steroids for any rheumatic arthritis or any other problems, whether he had sustained any history of, whether there was any history of head injury, previous surgeries. We want to know exactly what is the best plan for this person. Okay, this is in the PSC. So once we have decided the best plan and decided that the person needs this type of drugs and everything, now we have to discuss about the monitoring. So whether extensive monitoring is needed for this patient or general ASA standard monitoring. ASA standard means American Society of Anesthesiologists standard monitoring. They say that the patient's oxygenation, ventilation, circulation, and temperature shall be continually evaluated. This is what they say. So, and most important is the qualified anesthesia personnel shall be present in the room throughout the conduct of anesthesia. This is the main part. This is not like giving anesthesia and roaming outside like you most often do, but there should be proper PG who is taking care of the monitoring inside the operation theater. So now we'll see what is this. So oxygenation. Oxygenation means through the mechanical ventilator or through the anesthesia machine, we provide oxygen to the tissues, to the patient, because the person is not breathing on his own. So here, how do we monitor his oxygenation? We check by knowing the SpO2. So partial pressure of oxygen saturation. SpO2 is measured with the help of pulse oximeter device. So this is kept on the finger nail or ear lobes. we know the saturation ranging from 92 to 100%. If it is less than 92%, we adjust the oxygen parameters in such a way that more amount of oxygen is being delivered to the patient. And moreover, FiO2 or analyzer is also present, which is like a inspired oxygen fraction of the inspired oxygen. So this analyzer is also helpful in knowing about the concentration of oxygen being delivered and utilized by the patient. And ventilation is the complete receiving of the oxygen, participating in the gases exchange at the level of alveoli, and the carbon dioxide containing exhaled gases, they are vented out through the endotracheal tube, which are measured for capnogram. So capnography is the measurement of end tidal carbon dioxide, which closely gives the measurement of partial pressure of arterial carbon dioxide concentration. So this is the main part. We are not worried about the carbon dioxide at the tube. We are worried about the arterial concentrations of various gases like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and any other acidic gases which we can see in sepsis patients. So we know the capnography, and we know we have to be monitoring the disconnect alarm. So circulation is with the help of ECG and blood pressure and pulse oximetry. ECG is electrocardiogram, which we are all aware of. We have V1 to V6 leads, and lead 1, lead 2, lead 3 leads are the limb leads, and chest leads are obviously V1 to V6. And we have extended limb leads and extended chest leads, which can be kept on the posterior side of the chest also. This will be monitoring the heart function. So the septal part of the heart, anterior part of the heart, and lateral part of the heart. So likewise, we can check for the leads here. So inferior myocardial infarction will be shown as T wave inversions and ST segment elevations in 2, 3 leads, as well as AVF. So augmented limb leads. So these are AVF. So likewise in ECG, we can know the basic functioning of the heart as well as any ischemic changes, if at all they happen. So that will be shown in the ECG. So likewise, and blood pressure is known if it is more than 90/60, or if it is over 100/60, we can assume that the patient's organs, they are functioning properly, they are utilizing the oxygen which is being supplied through the anesthesia machine, and are able to manage their metabolisms at the microbial level very nicely. So temperature, so temperature probe is important, and the normothermia is very important for all the enzymatic activity and all the metabolic processes to happen in the body. And hypothermia is detrimental, and hyperthermia is obviously not indicated. So maintaining the patient in normothermia, and we have certain situations where hypothermia is needed, because hypothermia will reduce the rate of metabolic processes in the body. So we keep the patient in a light hypothermic condition, so where the metabolic processes and the utilization of oxygen and all the energy molecules is less to some extent. So the prognosis after the anesthesia is over and after the surgery is over will be in a better way. So we have certain conditions where hypothermic condition is very important. So we know in cardiac surgeries, where I give anesthesia to cardiac surgery patients, we keep ice once we do the sternotomy, open the pericardium. So we have the heart beating there. And what they do, so if the surgery is going on for CABG, coronary artery bypass grafting, and if we are doing the surgery with the help of bypass pump, where we circulate the blood from the inferior vena cava and superior vena cava to the outside pump, and we circulate in the outside bypass pump, we circulate there, filter there, monitor the temperature there, add any buffer agents, and return the oxygenated blood to the aorta. So this is the coronary artery bypass. Bypass means we are shutting down the heart, maintaining the circulation of the patient on a bypass pump, and returning back the blood through the with the help of this bypass pump. So here what we do, so if the patient's metabolic activity is at the lowest possible rate, then that will be very useful for maintenance of anesthesia and all the metabolic processes. If they are not having reflexively higher rate, so then that the prognosis will be very good. This is one type of hypothermic maintenance of CABG. Okay, so after that, the person has to be reheated again, or he has to be brought to the room temperature. Then only the reversal process has to be conducted. So the main important monitoring will be like oxygenation, ventilation, circulation, and temperature. So what type of pre-medications are to be given? These are to be given before the induction of anesthesia, They will be of two types, psychological and pharmacological. Psychological means we can provide adequate clarity about the type of anesthesia he'll be receiving. So what will happen? So this is like deja vu feeling. So if the person is taken abruptly and if he's not given any information, he'll definitely start to panic. But that should not happen, because all his sympathetic nervous system and the somatic systems, they will get agitated, and all the parameters in the pH and all the enzymes, they and adrenaline, noradrenaline, all the symptomatic activities which will be having detrimental effect on the heart, they will be increased. So if that should not happen, we can give adequate information about the type of surgery, type of anesthesia, how he will be shifted to the operation theater, what will happen in the operation theater, and towards the end of the surgery, what he will notice. Because if the patient is in the effect of anesthetic agents and if he is in the level of surgical anesthesia, that is okay. But what will happen when the person is becoming awake and emerging from the anesthesia? So you'll be having all the confused parts. If we tell them previously that this idea of giving anesthesia will wear off and you'll be slowly recognizing the atmosphere of operation theater, that may happen. Or if you are really so sleepy, you will be shifted to the ward, and if you will not remember anything about the operation theater, you'll be hearing all the voices and noises of the operation theater, personnel roaming, shouting instructions to each other or talking to each other in the discussing in the surgical procedure. So these type of things, if he is aware, he will not panic. So that is the psychological support we can provide to the patients. And obviously pharmacological, like benzodiazepine, barbiturates, and other drugs like glycopyrrolate, fentanyl, ketorolac, and promethazine are important, which are beneficial in their own way. So what are the primary goals and secondary goals of providing pre-medication? So we need to provide anxiolysis and sedation, analgesia, amnesia, anti-salivary effect. So because we are manipulating his airway, so there is increased secretions of the salivary glands, and that can cause respiratory obstruction or that can cause aspiration. So these secretions, if they enter the trachea, tracheobronchial tree, and if they reach the terminal bronchioles and through that one into the alveoli, the gaseous exchange which has to occur, so that cannot happen so freely. So giving effect on the SpO2 and all the oxygenation processes and all the metabolic processes in turn. So we don't want any more than adequate secretions forming in his oral cavity. So that for that we need to have anti-salivary effect with the help of glycopyrrolate or atropine. So we need to increase the gastric fluid pH and decrease in the gastric fluid volume, so that if at all there is any aspiration chance, gastroesophageal sphincter is protecting the contents of the gastric cavity not to spill over into the esophagus and not to come on into the oral cavity and being aspirated into the trachea. So that is the tone of the gastroesophageal sphincter. But once the patient is under the influence of anesthetic agents, this sphincter may not hold good and the tone will definitely decrease. So if there is any chance of aspiration also, if the gastric fluid pH is not acidic as it is usual, if it is made alkaline, and if the gastric fluid volume is decreased, chances of this gastric fluid, if at all aspirated into the lung cavity also, the process of producing infection, inflammation, and sepsis will be very minimized. So this is the basic aspiration prophylaxis we can do. So these are the primary goals of providing pre-medication. And the secondary goals are the facilitation of induction of anesthesia, facilitation of post-operative analgesia, and prevention of post-operative nausea and vomiting, which is one of the most common post-operative complication or side effect of the GA. So pre-medications, when we are giving pre-medication, so we need to assess his physical status, age, level of anxiety and pain, type of surgery is undergoing, history of drug allergy, nausea, vomiting, etc. So if these factors are present, we have to be extra careful and we have to decide which type of analgesic and which type of pre-medication or nausea and sedative decreasing drugs are to be given. So once we have done with the PAC assessment, so we know what type of pre-med. If the person is a 30 years or 35-year-old person who is strong, brave, and he knows much about his surgery, so he will not panic or he will not have any confusion. He will be in a clear state of mind and he'll cooperate nicely. But what if the surgery going patient is a child or more than 60 years, more than 70 years person? So he will be agitated on his own. So we need to pacify him by giving pre-medication. So there is no point in really explaining him about the topic of anesthesia, how the surgery will be going on. No, that will not be encouraging for the person. Moreover, he will panic more. So the children and the aged persons who cannot understand the topic of surgery and perioperative management of the patient as such, they should be given prompt analgesia, sedation, amnesia, anxiolytic drugs in the preoperative room itself, and those persons have to be given proper sedation in the operation theater. So once the PAC is done and once the pre-medication drugs are given, the induction part comes here. It is the process of rendering the patient unconscious and the effect produced by adequate concentrations of an anesthetic in the brain. So examples are propofol, thiopentone sodium, ketamine hydrochloride, and etomidate. So propofol, thiopentone, so they have detrimental effects on the brain, and they can decrease the cerebral pressures of the brain, and cerebral partial pressures and cerebral perfusion pressures are decreased, whereas ketamine will increase the blood pressure and the cerebral perfusion pressure. Etomidate is very good for the heart, and it will not cause any major changes or any changes in the hemodynamic parameters, and that's why we prefer them in the cardiac surgeries, where a minute change is also detrimental in the hemodynamic parameters. So once the patient is rendered unconscious, we intubate. We intubate with the help of succinyl choline, where the muscle fasciculations are seen and the drug is very fast acting. Whereas in non-depolarizing drugs like atracurium, vicurium, or pancuronium, so the immediate effect is not present, and the chances of muscle fasciculations is also not there. So once the patient is induced and the intubation agent is given in the form of succinyl choline or vicuronium, now the patient is completely paralyzed and vocal cords are separated, abducted, and now we have a clear path to intubate the patient, or to place the endotracheal tube inside the oral cavity and through the tracheal rings, and the cuff is inflated, and the patient end of the endotracheal tube is connected to the anesthesia machine. Now the anesthesia machine will take over this oxygenation and ventilation, and it will be pumping on its own. So we'll set up the tidal volume the patient will need, and we'll set up the rate, respiratory rate. We'll set up the concentration of oxygen that is needed for his basic metabolic process to go on smoothly, and the machine will take over. So we'll be monitoring with all the others. So how do we maintain now? Because the induction agents we have given, they will be immediately eliminated from the body. So now we have to maintain him with the help of inhalational or intravenous anesthetic agents and intermittent doses of muscle relaxants like vicuronium. So previously, if we have given at the rate of 0.08 to 0.1 milligrams per kg body weight, now we have to supplement with 1/4 or 1/5 of the dose every 20 to 30 minutes, because we have to maintain the surgical depth of anesthesia here. And also analgesic agents also, they have to be given intermittently based on the duration of action of the selected opioids or any other analgesic agents. So we have to provide balanced anesthesia in the form of amnesia, muscle relaxations, and induction agents, and we have to provide oxygen nitrous oxide, and this is called balanced anesthesia. And obviously all the hemodynamic parameters like pulse rate, blood pressure, SpO2, temperature, and tidal carbon dioxide, all these have to be maintained properly in the intraoperative period. So now the surgery is over and it is time for the patient to awake. Now the excess muscle relaxation is reversed with the help of neostigmine drug, and adequate long-acting opioid analgesic for continued analgesia in the post-operative period is a must. So it's not like once the surgery is over, patient is left on his own. No, we have to plan for the first 24 to 36 hours also, because the patient is operated on, all the tissues were damaged, the superficial to deep structures were really manipulated in such a way that the pain receptors, because the person was in the surgical depth of anesthesia, he will not receive any pain receptors, pain signals from the peripheral tissues to the brain, but he will be sensing the pain. But once the patient is awake, all the pain receptors, they will be showing the exaggerated level of pain which is received by the brain. So he will be in trauma. This is called stress. So that's why whenever a person meets with an accident or whenever he falls off, we check for his post-traumatic stress condition. So this is also called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So that type of stress will be there in the perioperative period if this patient is operated on. So we have to manage his pain adequately or more than adequately and keep the patient comfortably for the first 24 to 30 hours at least, before the pain signals will be comfortably managed by the system of its own. So the removal of a placed airway management device is performed only after the patient has met a long list of extubation criteria. So this is how we discussed about the technique for anesthesia, and I have repeated for your comfort and my comfort for that matter. Here, now we go on to complications of general anesthesia. They may range from minor to catastrophic. General complications will be nausea and vomiting. The patient will be confused and agitated. So the two type of complications are present in GA. One is in the intraoperative period and in the postoperative period. Intraoperative period, because we are managing him in the surgical depth of anesthesia, so we can see the complications in the form of circulatory collapse or respiratory collapse. So we need to maintain the hemodynamic parameters. But once the patient is awake from the anesthesia, so we see post-operative complications of GA in the first 24 hours before all the anesthetic drugs which were given to the patient are eliminated and excreted through the urine and feces. So this should be happening. So the process of monitoring the patient ends only after maximum amount of anesthetic agents are eliminated from the patient's body. So this is a must. So we know that from the catastrophic changes to the minor of the minorest problems also, we can expect in a patient who has undergone GA. So nausea and vomiting, confusion and agitation, hiccups, because this endotracheal airway was manipulated and disturbed by endotracheal tube process, that can produce hiccup, and headache may be there because the drugs were depressing his central nervous system, and now it is once again activated. The oxygen may be adequate, may not be adequate, hypoxia may be there, so that can produce headache. And myalgia, because the vicuronium and other succinyl choline drugs were given, so that will cause muscle relaxation. And because of analgesic drugs, the patient was not having any pain in the operation theater. And depending on the position of the patient, depending on the instrumentation on the body of the patient, so the patient, once he is awake, he may feel myalgia or severe body pains. And hypoxia and hypoventilation may be present, and hypotension may be present in the postoperative period if there is excessive blood loss, or if there is any remnant of the anesthetic drug effect on the body. These are the general terms. So the type of complications are respiratory complications, cardiovascular complications, and neurological complications. The respiratory complications are the most serious and most common postoperative complications and the largest single cause of morbidity. So every person who undergoes GA, he will be having disturbance in his tracheobronchial tree, bronchospasm, sore throat, and all the pain in the oral cavity because it was manipulated. That is the morbidity. So that's why we call it as largest single cause of morbidity. But post-operative deaths are because of the changes or in the irreversible damage to the heart main. So that's why cardiac comes first, and respiratory complications in the form of laryngospasm or bronchospasm or aspiration pneumonia, that is also called acid aspiration syndrome. So this is the second cause of post-operative death. So we discuss about 2 or 3 conditions of post-operative complications related to the respiratory system. So pulmonary collapse is the first one. So he may experience inability to breathe deeply and cough up bronchial secretions. So that these secretions will go into the alveolar complex and that will completely block them, and there is alveolar collapse. So if all the alveolar units of a significant segment of the lung, they collapse and not participate in the functioning of tracheobronchial tree or in the gases exchange, so that is tend to be causing pulmonary collapse also. The contributory factors are paralysis of the cilia by anesthetic agents, where the secretions can be coughed out with the help of cilia. If the cilia are paralyzed by anesthetic agents, so he cannot cough out bronchial secretions. And if there is impairment of the diaphragmatic movement, if there is over sedations where his reflexes are not regained to his full or strong possible effort like he was having in the preoperative period, abdominal distension and pain. So these are the contributory factors causing collapse of his pulmonary system. Clinical signs like tachypnea or tachycardia may be present, mild pyrexia or raised temperature may be present, diminished breath sounds and dullness to percussion over the affected segment. So the affected segment, because if it is not opening, so then we can feel a third type of percussion sounds when we percuss on his chest at the particular segment. So pulmonary collapse can be prevented by cessation of smoking, physiotherapy for COPD patients, and deferring the elective surgery after 2 weeks in a patient with chest infection. So this we need to do. So post-operative measures to reduce the risk, like we can encourage the patient to breathe deeply. We can ask them to undergo mobilization and encourage his cough, give analgesia to relieve his chest pain, because the patient with the pleuritic chest pain, if the person is having chest infection, will be having, if we have a pleuritic chest pain, even the slightest breathing also will produce rubbing of the visceral and pleural surfaces of the chest cavity, chest of the lungs, and that can produce chest pain. So to avoid that, we can give adequate analgesics and encourage coughing and breathing. And oxygenation is also provided. So next comes the pulmonary infection. It is common after pulmonary collapse or aspiration of the gastric contents, commonly caused by gram-negative bacilli acquired by aspiration of oropharyngeal secretions. And clinical features of fever, tachypnea, and green sputum may be present, and chest X-ray shows patchy opacities. Treatment is with the help of antibiotics, and oxygen is also needed sometimes. And it is prevented by reduce the gastric volume and acidity. That means we increase the pH towards alkalinity, and we employ rapid sequence intubation, where we apply the pressure on the cricoid cartilage while intubating the trachea, so that the risk of aspiration from the gastric cavity to the tracheal drains is reduced. So this is about pulmonary infection. So the main one is airway obstruction. It is secondary to reduced muscle tone from residual anesthetic. Soft tissue trauma is present, edema or pooled secretions may be present. So this will cause airway obstruction. So that means at the level of glottic opening, if these secretions or tissues, if they get obstructed, so obviously the person may not be breathing. So this is the main one where it leads to inadequate ventilation, hypoxemia, and hypercapnia. How do we manage him? It is with head tilt, jaw elevation, and anterior displacement of the mandible. This maneuver is called triple maneuver, where there is head tilt, chin lift, and jaw elevated. So that will displace the mandible and make the airway patent again. If it is not reversible, we introduce a oropharyngeal airway. That is the Goodell's oropharyngeal airway. It's a plastic curved one, which will help to make the airway patent. So what are the other airway complications? So position of the cuff in the larynx. So once we pass the cuff, which is present on the endotracheal tube through the glottic opening, we inflate the cuff. We inflate the cuff so that the tube will not come out. But in certain scenarios, during intubation, if the cuff is damaged, and even if we inflate the cuff with the help of air, if that is leaking, so during the procedure of surgery, if we don't monitor properly, there is a risk of that cuff slowly coming out of the larynx through the glottis into the oral cavity. So we are not having any patent airway, and the endotracheal tube is said to be self-extubated. So that can happen. That is also a complication of complication if we do not monitor the endotracheal tube properly. So there is airway trauma during intubation. They may occur. So an apprentice or a person or the first year postgraduate student, if he is not handling the airway of the patient properly, there is always chance of dislocated mandible, tooth damage, and damage to the airway tissues. So as we already told, there is sore throat because the person is not breathing on his own, because he is subjected to manipulation with the help of instruments, steel and iron instruments. We are keeping him in his oral cavity, and that can produce mild infection also. So that will cause sore throat. And there is edema of the glottis because we are putting endotracheal tube through the glottic opening, and we are disturbing the glottis on both sides. Listening structures, once you see any videos, you can observe that. That will cause edema also, and there may be pressure injury in the trachea. So if we are going for rapid sequence intubation, then we put some pressure, that is called Sellick's maneuver. If we put pressure on the trachea to obstruct the trachea, to obstruct the esophagus, so we are not blocking the trachea here. By putting pressure on the trachea, we are pressing it downward so that the esophageal tube, which is present on the posterior surface of the trachea, it is collapsed on the trachea. So now, because the pressure is more, there may be any residual pressure injury on the trachea also. So other respiratory complications like aspiration, airway obstruction, pneumonia can occur. Bronchospasm. So in a patient with hyperreactive airway, we call it reactive airway, like asthma, COPD, chronic bronchitis, or any allergies. We call these type of patients to be having with reactive airway. If that is there, he is always at risk of bronchospasm in the intraoperative period or in the postoperative period. That has to be managed with bronchodilators and as well as steroid. Atelectasis is collapse of the alveoli, like we discussed. It's also called pulmonary collapse. Pulmonary collapse is the other term for atelectasis, and there is always a risk of hypoventilation if gases exchange is not adequate. So we need to know specifically about the aspiration pneumonia. The risk factors being extremes of age, in emergency cases, types of surgery is a very important one. recent meal, if the person is having more amount of gastric volume, when the GA is given, the lower gastroesophageal sphincter loses its tone, allowing the gastric volume, which is in high quantity, to slowly come out, and that is regurgitated into the oral cavity, and that can be aspirated. So any recent meal that is like full stomach persons are more at risk of having this aspiration. Any trauma, pregnancy is also a state of increased intra-abdominal pressure for obvious reasons. And if the person is in pain or stress, if the person is having any depressed level of consciousness because of head injury, if the person is morbid obese, where the neck is very short and abdomen is huge, and he's having huge increased intragastric pressure, which will not, so the gastroesophageal tone is a poor fellow, it cannot tolerate this type of raised gastric pressures. When the person is with difficult airway, and the person is having poor motor control, like in some ascending motor paralysis or any other musculoskeletal tissue problems. So the person will be having poor motor control. And diabetes mellitus. In diabetes mellitus, it affects all the parts of the body, and in the neuropathy changes, it can also decrease the stimulation of the muscles, so that the person may not be able to hold the tone of the gastroesophageal sphincter. These are the probable risk factors for aspiration. So if the fasting is not proper, like we encourage taking clear water only 2 hours before the surgery, we ask him to stop taking solid foods at least 6 hours before the probable surgery. If these type of fasting guidelines are not followed, the person will be having risk of aspiration pneumonia. So we need to reduce the gastric volume and increase the gastric pH with the help of H2 receptor antagonists, proton pump inhibitors, and antacids. And we increase the gastric motility, like with prokinetic drugs like metoclopramide. We give 10 milligrams per kg, 10 milligrams IV metoclopramide, so that the progressive motility of the intestines is maintained. Antisaladox, they decrease the salivary gland and mucosal gland secretions with the help of glycopyrrolate, atropine, or scopolamine. Now we come to the cardiovascular complications. The risk of anesthesia and surgery are increased in patients suffering from cardiovascular disease like arrhythmias, valvular diseases, heart failure, or hypertension. So the basic complications will be hypertension or hypotension, arrhythmias, myocardial ischemia and infarction may be there, and profound cardiac arrest may happen if the cardiovascular system is not properly monitored. So what is hypotension? It is decrease in blood pressure less than 20 millimeters of mercury below the baseline. If the person is having 120 by 70, if the systolic blood pressure comes down to 100, so that is taken as definition of hypotension. It may be caused due to hypovolemia, it is the most common cause, peripheral vasodilatation due to residual anesthetic agent, and reduced cardiac output in heart failure. So these are the probable causes of hypotension. They have to be identified and treated to prevent further irreversible ischemic damage. They may lead to cerebral anoxia. They may cause effect on the renal system and cause renal failure. They can cause myocardial ischemia or infarction. So how do we manage? First step is usually the administration of fluids. So then we seek the help of vasopressors. Vasopressors means the drugs acting on the blood vessels in the body. They are called vasopressors. The drugs acting on the heart and bringing about contraction, they are called inotropes. Inotropes are different and vasopressors are different. So with the help of vasopressors like mepentermin, ephedrine, phenylephrine, we can have contraction of the blood vessels, so that the peripheral pooling of the blood is not present, and all the blood, most of the blood is returned back to central circulation, so that the hypertension may be treated to some extent. So what is hypertension? BP more than 160 by 100 or increase in more than 20% from the baseline. It can be due to increased intravascular fluid volume. So if we use induction agent ketamine hydrochloride, and if it is given in large doses, then also it can cause hypertension. Because of the pain, hypercapnia, and hypoxemia, so there may be hypertension. It can lead to intracerebral bleeding or stroke. It can increase the surgical bleeding. It can cause left side heart failure or pulmonary edema or myocardial ischemia. These are the probable prognostic factors or the risk factors of hypertension. Management is to treat the underlying cause. We will give beta blockers like esmolol and metoprolol to bring down the blood pressure. It can be prevented by taking cautions in pre-existing hypertension. If a person says that he is hypertensive and he is taking medications for a long time, so then when we are giving anesthesia, so we have to understand that his auto-regulation mechanism is at fault. So if we say that my BP is 110 by 70, So from a normal systolic blood pressure of 80 to 150, if the blood pressure is increasing, heart rate is decreasing. If the blood pressure is decreasing, heart rate will increase. So that will match and increase, maintain cardiac output at a stable level. But once we give any drug to decrease the blood pressure in a hypertensive patient, because this auto-regulation mechanism is not properly functioning in a hypertensive patient, so it will fall down excessively. Like if the person is at having systolic blood pressure of 160 by 100, if we give some drug to decrease his BP and we expect him to come around 110, 110 or 120, that may not happen because his auto regulation is not there. If we push him like this, it is like zero gravity. If we push on one side, it will go without any resistance. So it may fall down to 40 or 50 systolic blood pressure also. So that is the basic fault in auto-regulation mechanism. In any chronic hypertensive patient, we have to assume and we have to always suspect that his auto-regulation mechanism is faulty, and we have to give anesthesia and maintain his vasopressors very delicately, and we have to be very conscious about severe hypotension and cardiac arrest. So renal complications may be in the form of post-operative urinary retention, and inability to void urine post-operatively is very common, especially after groin, pelvic or perineal regions surgeries. Operations under spinal or epidural anesthesia. Management is catheterization of the bladder and with removal of the catheter after 2 to 3 days. The renal failure may result from protracted inadequate perfusion of the kidney because of changes in the hypertension and hypotension and the hypovolemia. Because the perfusion pressure of renal perfusion pressure is not maintained adequately in the operation theater, there is always a possibility of postoperative urinary retention, postoperative urinary infection, and that can cause renal failure and decrease in the glomerular filtration rate, and the person will slowly land up in end-stage renal failure if it is not managed properly. Hypertension and renal problems, they are very hazardous. We can see that in our hospital also the nephrology department is holding many dialysis machines, and all the people with hypertension, they have hypertensive nephropathy, and once the end-stage renal failure is coming, so they have to be put on maintenance hemodialysis. So these patients are obviously at risk and they have to go for renal transplantation at one point of his life. So the causes are hypovolemia, water depletion or extracellular fluid depletion. Prevention is by adequate fluid replacement before, during and after the surgery. So now coming to the last part, neurological complications. The most people will be in confused state and agitated state, and they have to be made calm by providing adequate sedation drugs without compromising on his respiratory problem. So respiratory depression causing drugs will be there. So the sedation drugs can cause respiratory depression. So we'll decrease the doses of the sedation drugs and keep him calm. A post-operative patient may appear confused due to age, use of sedation, hypoxemia, hypoglycemia, stroke, or any electrolyte imbalance. So how do we manage? Treat the primary cause. If there is an hyponatremia, treat it. If there is an hypoglycemia, treat it. If the person is not receiving oxygen at his alveolar level, give him some supplemental oxygen till the anesthetic agents are completely eliminated from his body. If you are using more amount of sedation, then also he'll be having respiratory distress. He's awake but having respiratory distress. So that person needs supplemental oxygen. If the person is more than 60 or 70 years of age and because of his post-operative cognitive dysfunction, which is very important in aged patients, so that person may also be in a state of confusion and delirium in the post-operative period. And some patients may need management in an ICU. So the main problem of GA will be with delayed recovery. So if we are using more amount of muscle relaxants or more higher doses of anesthetic drugs, then the person may be going into delayed recovery. And if there is any huge insult to his CNS during the surgery, like head injury patients, he cannot be immediately extubated on the table and made awake. So that is not possible because his brain is damaged. There is damage to his brain parenchyma and all the vital centers of the brain, if they are really undergone damage or reversible damage to some extent. So he will need post-operative mechanical ventilator support for quite a period of time. So this is basically because of cerebral hypo and hyperperfusion, and our anesthetic drugs can also cause cerebral depression, which causes the person to go into delayed recovery, and the emergence and recovery process has to be slowly taken. Okay, so finally, the complications of GA during anesthesia and after anesthesia can be dealt like this. During anesthesia, there may be respiratory depression and hypercarbia. Cardiac arrhythmias can happen, so they may be ranging from simple tachycardia, simple bradycardia to almost paroxysmal atrial tachycardia or paroxysmal ventricular tachycardia. So you may see ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia also if you are not managing them or monitoring them properly. So cardiac arrhythmias are very important in the anesthesia period. And there may be hypotension, there may be acid pneumonia, acid aspiration syndrome, and the process of laryngospasm and asphyxia has to be really cared for in the operation theater. So after anesthesia, so post-operative nausea and vomiting is very important. If the person is persistently sedated, there may be impaired psychomotor function. You have to monitor him and maintain him in ICU and re-intubate sometimes if it is not really possible for him to be awake. Pneumonia, atelectasis may be there, organ toxicities to liver and kidney, and emergence delirium. So once the patient is awake, wildly awake, so he is not able to comprehend what is happening to his body and why he is in the operation theater, why he is in the post-operative ward. If he is not able to comprehend immediately, so then he may take some time for adjusting to the new environment. So that is like emergence delirium, and he has to be sedated again and taken away from the sedative drugs slowly. So this is the basic complications of general anesthesia during the intraoperative period during anesthesia and after the anesthesia. And hope you really got something about this class, about the technique of GA as we told in the last Friday. And today we discussed extensively or to some understanding about the complications of GA. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.